Mainaya Kashankichi. Welcome back to Nobody Taught Me. I am Serafim Marca, and this is episode 3, The Shame and the Shift. In the first two episodes, we covered how Victor grew up hearing two languages and what happened when school pulled him entirely into Spanish. In this episode, we leave the classroom and go somewhere harder, the emotions. Because as it turns out, how you feel about the language can matter as much as how much you hear it. When Victor was a teenager, he felt embarrassed that his mother spoke Quechua more than Spanish. In Bolivia, Spanish was the language of the city, of education, and of upward mobility. Quechua was the language of the countryside, and in a society that ranked those two worlds clearly, speaking Quechua felt like wearing a sign that said you came from somewhere lesser. Now, most language research focuses on what happens inside your brain, grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. But the researcher Bonnie Norton argued that we need to look beyond cognition and ask a different question. What is the learner's relationship with the social world? Norton introduced the concept of investment, which is different from motivation. Motivation asks, does this person want to learn? Investment instead asks, given how the world treats this person, does it make sense for them to try? That distinction changes a lot because Victor was not unmotivated. He used Quechua every single day. He could communicate in it, but the world around him let him know in 100 small ways that Quechua was not worth investing in. His teachers pushed Spanish, his peers associated Quechua with rural poverty, society ranked Spanish above Quechua, and Victor, as a teenager, observed that ranking. The researcher Uhu Anya studied how identity shapes language learning by examining 6 black college students in the United States. One of them, a man she calls Kyle, had a language learning experience that mirrors Victor's emotional trajectory. Kyle took Spanish in high school. His teacher spoke too fast and refused to use any English, so he could not keep up. He sat in the back of the room to avoid being called on. He felt anxious just walking through the door, and he watched as Latino heritage speakers in the class excelled effortlessly, which only deepened his sense that his language was not for him. Kyle eventually passed with the minimum grade and tried Japanese in college. That experience was even worse. After that, he gave up on learning a second language entirely. Kyle was smart and capable. He just lacked a sense of belonging. The classroom never made him feel like part of a community of learners. He never saw himself reflected in the people who spoke the language. And without that connection, there was no investment. Anya also discusses the case of Michela, a black student who went on a study abroad program in Spain. She was the only black person in the group. On the streets, white Spanish men harassed her with racist and sexually explicit comments. Her white classmates accused her of being overly sensitive when she tried to talk about it. So she withdrew. She limited her contact with Spaniards. Her language learning collapsed, not because of any cognitive limitation, but because her social world made it unbearable to participate. Now, Victor's experience is not the same. He is not black in the United States. He is an indigenous language speaker in Bolivia. But the mechanism is identical. When society tells you that your language marks you as inferior, your emotional response is not a side effect of the learning process. It is the learning process. Lee, Hiver, and Popeye, in their overview of individual differences in SLA, categorize emotions like anxiety, shame, and self-efficacy as affective variables, and they make a critical point here. These variables are not fixed. they can change over time, and they can be changed by the environment. And Victor proves this because at some later point, this shame shifted. As an adult, he started speaking Quechua on purpose to people who spoke Spanish and Quechua. He did it to show them that he was one of them. He was no longer running from Quechua or hiding it, he was choosing it, and he was using this as an act of identity. In the research, this shift has a name. It is the move from a subtractive bilingualism, where a heritage language is seen as something to outgrow, to additive bilingualism, where both languages have value. Garner, one of the most influential motivation researchers in SLA, called the desire to connect with a language community integrative motivation. Victor's adult relationship with Quechua is integrative in the deepest sense. He speaks Quechua to belong. Now, here is a contemporary positive example. Think about Gloria from Modern Family, the show. She arrives in the United States speaking English with a heavy Colombian accent and constant mistakes. But over the years of being in a family that accepts her, that laughs with her instead of at her, and that never makes her feel lesser, her confidence grows and her English improves. That is what a supportive environment looks like. The takeaway from this episode is that language learning is not just a cognitive process, but an emotional and social one. How the world treats your identity determines whether you invest in a language or abandon it. And the good news from the research is that these emotional variables can change. Shame is not permanent, but it takes more than an individual willpower. It takes environments, communities, and policies that tell people their language is worth keeping. In the final episode, we step back and ask the big practical questions. What will it actually take to break the cycle of shame and poor learning outcomes? And what does the research say about saving and promoting a language like Quechua? Thank you for listening. This is Nobody Taught Me. One voice, 4 lessons on saving a language.